So, that in respect to egotism is the main difference. So this is kind of, he's stating a real egoic statement. In most books, the way I'm reading this is that in most books, the egoic statement is kind of, it's a little bit softer. I don't want to be, intense or in your face with my message to you. I want to be more kind of subtle, oblique. This book, he's stating right in the beginning, this is not the case here. If you're going to read this book, you're going to get it slammed in your face, basically, is what he's saying. And that's a major difference, so get used to it, is basically what this line is saying. And he's very right. We commonly do not remember that it is, after all, always the first person that is speaking. Now, what does he mean by that? What he's saying is that even when a text or a person or an author is speaking in the third person or the impersonal person, like when one does this, when one does that, or you write about a novel, or a politician is speaking about some issue, they're really speaking about themselves. They are really speaking about themselves. This is the crucial thing with Walden Pond and with Thoreau. It's all about the self. We go back, I lived alone. I built it myself. My hands only. I'm now a sojourner. There's such a sense of egotism. It's not a sense of like, self-righteousness. It's a sense of, this is who I am. I'm an individual. And I'm making my mark on the planet, in whatever way, whatever humble or magnificent ways it may come. Regardless, it's always the first person that's speaking. I am always in all that I do. And actually a very American, a very capitalist, a very, in some ways, controversial kind of a stance. Can you call that democratic? I think you can. A democracy of individuals, and that is kind of how the ancient Greeks brought up their democracy. But nonetheless, I digress. This is all about the individual, and you can see that coming out. You can see that American sense of individuality. I should not talk so much about myself if there were anybody else whom I knew as well. I just love that line. I've always loved that line. You can see the humor that came right back in there in this tone. There's a humility in this. I should not talk so much about myself, saying like, I'm not talking in a sense to boast myself. This isn't self-righteous egotism. This is more practical egotism or egoic stance. First person speaking. Who else do I really know? Do you want me to talk about my neighbor? I don't even really know my neighbor. Why doesn't my neighbor speak for himself? You'll get a better accounting if my neighbor speaks. You're not going to get a true, let's remember this, a true, how do we define true? A true accounting of anything that I can speak of that's not my own, because it's not me. I can't really talk to you about anything else other than myself, because what else do I know? What else is there for me? That's what he's saying here, and there's actually a jibing kind of humor that's a little bit arrogant, but at the same time there's also a humility in there, in admitting that he really knows nothing except what's inside of him. What's with him is really all he knows, and he doesn't feel that he has an authority to speak on anything else than what he knows, which is himself. And he wouldn't want to be falsely righteous, or truly self-righteous, as to speak in a false term of something that's not his. I think this is why I think this is like probably the most important part of Walden Pond, because it really sets the tone for what he's doing here in this piece. And really, you look back in terms of a larger literary perspective historically, this is pretty revolutionary. You look back in the current times of today, like this is just basically a journal. If we were to look back historically at this time in like 1848, I believe it was, 1845, something like that, where he was writing this, people weren't really writing these kinds of, let me pour my heart out kind of things to you. There was the Romantic movement in in England with Wordsworth, who really kind of brought in the individual and the common man and things like that. But even there, he did speak about himself. He did. You can't deny that. But this takes it, I think, to a whole new level, and actually kind of runs off of the tales of Wordsworth and the Romantics, and it's kind of like the American version of the English Romantics, and that's what Transcendentalism in some ways is. As a side note, I also kind of want to say that I kind of view Walden Pond as, in its own time, it's kind of like a documentary. If we were to put Walden Pond like in today's world, you'd kind of find like a documentary about an individual living, in a world. This is like what I actually kind of think this is like the first actual documentary that's ever been made. And I think that's a great way to kind of look at, in one sense, to look at Walden. Not only, though, is it just a documentary that's giving you kind of like scientific or kind of outward data, it's also an internal documentary, an internal journal, if you will, but not just a journal. This is carefully crafted literature. Every line has just so much in it, and there's so much purpose written in this. This isn't just like a journal of him, writing I love you, I love yous, and I feel bad today kind of a journal. This is a highly, crafted piece of literature. And I don't speak Greek and Latin, but my professor that I learned this book from, one of the people I learned this book from, Professor Mike West from University of Pittsburgh, he is, fluent in Latin and Greek. And just about like, there are so many Latin and Greek puns and things in this text that I am not, qualified to teach you on, but it's all there. Just trust me, it's all there. Thoreau was a graduate of Harvard, and he was fluent in Latin and Greek, and read the classics in their forms, their original languages. So all of that is in here. So this book is just so incredible. I'm sorry, I'm going on and on, but nonetheless, that's just more information for you. Okay, so unfortunately, I am confined to this theme by the narrowness of my experience. And there you can see again a kind of repetition of what we just talked about in this past line, and unfortunately showing that humility again, the narrowness of his experience. Moreover, I, on my side, require of every writer, first or last, a simple and sincere account of his own life, and not merely what he has heard of other men's lives. And that just kind of goes back to what I was saying about the neighbor. And he's really making like almost like a call to arms to every man, every writer, to stand up, man, and speak your own life as it is for you, and be truthful. Give the hard truth, the amazing truth, the audacious truth of what your life has been and what your life is. I want to hear that. And that's really what Thoreau is saying here. Don't tell me all about this other stuff, about other people and distractions and things. Tell me about you. Some such account as he would send to his kindred from a distant land. So now here we get into this discussion about the distant land. Some such account as he would send to his kindred from a distant land. So we're getting into a metaphor now. This is a metaphor he's entering into, and he's likening this writer that he's talking about as, writing to a kindred or a loved one, while this writer's in a distant land, or they're just far away from each other. For if he has lived sincerely, and we'll talk a lot about this, living sincerely is a huge thing in Walden Pond. For if he has lived sincerely, and I view that as really from himself, from his own personal view, his own egotistic kind of point of view, but Thoreauian ego, not negative ego. Thoreauian ego is how you live sincerely. For if he has lived sincerely, it must have been in a distant land to me. Okay, now what does that mean? For if he has lived sincerely, it must have been a distant land to me. What Thoreau is talking about here, it really is bringing to the forefront, again, that sense of individuality. Each person is different. And if you live your life sincerely, it is going to be completely foreign to me and my life and how I live it. And we can share. That's where we can come together and share. And, that's why Thoreau is saying, I require a simple and sincere account of his life so that he can read it. He wants to hear of other truly sincere men. Let me hear from your life as you can hear from mine as well. And this is kind of like the coming together of individuals, different individuals. This is really very American, in a true sense, a true American democracy, a capitalist American democracy, where you have individuals standing up for themselves, sharing, coming together, sharing in their individuality in a larger collective body. That is just so American. And in the Thoreauian sense, are we there right now? Are the bailouts that? That's all debatable, for sure. Is the high rate of unemployment, is that really an American action? Or would an American find a job for himself, figure something out on his own? Would an American really be reliant on a corporation for their job? What would Thoreau say about that? What would Thoreau say about the government giving the bailouts? Are these really, truly capitalist American democratic values in the American sense? I think he's saying they're not, but I will leave that up to you to think about. This is actually a very beautiful line. For if he has lived sincerely, it must have been in a distant land to me. How beautiful. And, there's something in that. If you can just catch the beauty of that line, it is just really amazing. I can't teach you that. I can just, kind of urge you into that. I had a teacher teaching us Shakespeare, and he said, we were reading a line from Venus and Adonis, and he said, just a beautiful line of poetry. He just stopped and he said, I can teach you all about, these words and these lines and what they mean historically and blah, 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 but I just can't teach you how that's just a beautiful line. And I say the same thing to you. I just can't teach you that this is just a beautiful, beautiful line. You just have to, either get it or you don't, and you can keep going for it. Perhaps these pages are more particularly addressed to poor students. As for the rest of my readers, they will accept such portions as apply to them. Now that's very interesting, is it not? Perhaps these pages are particularly addressed to poor students. Now why would it be to poor students? Is this almost a Christian adage? I'm immediately thinking of Jesus, and oh gosh, the thought just left my mind. Darn it! I just lost my train of thought there on that. But there is something in there that reminds me of Jesus, and I guess the thoughts aren't coming to me right now, so I guess we're not going there right now. But this is a really beautiful line that really the people that are the poor people. I remember now. How the Jesus line of, woe for a rich man to make it into heaven and be easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to get into heaven. Do you think that line might be kind of resonating in this line here by Thoreau? I think so. I definitely think so. Now, why is that? Because poor students, they're not trapped up in the world and in money. And this is a huge thing with Thoreau. And it's not so much money necessarily in my view, but for Thoreau, I think it is. But it is about your priorities. Thoreau lived alone, built himself a mile from anyone, earning his living by his hands alone. So he's really about austerity for a reason. The austerity simplifies your life and allows you to focus on the meaningful things in your life, not the distracting things that rich people have to deal with, mortgages and investments and employees and orchards and crop failure and all those kinds of things. So this is really for poor students to be able to work with. And to understand. I have to pause the video for a second.